Hi, everybody. Welcome back, and thank you guys so much for joining us today. I'm Emily Washkowitz. I'm a VP of Conference for CEO and a second year at the business school. It is so exciting to see today come to life. We've been working around the clock for almost a year on today. I am honored to have the opportunity to introduce Richard Whitten. Richard is a 1975 graduate of Columbia College and currently a Vice Chair Emeritus of the Board of Trustees of Columbia University. He serves as Special Advisor to President Lee Bollinger and heads up Columbia Entrepreneurship. The organization's mission is to encourage and support entrepreneurial thinking, problem solving, and new venture formation across the university and the alumni community. Richard has been integral in making today happen, so please help me welcome Richard.
Thank you very much. And thank you and the entire group of people that have put this extraordinary event together. There are myriad details and logistics that we, knock wood, we seem to have really mastered, and it's just an amazing thing. I should also point out that it is a cooperative effort between many schools here at Columbia, and that's actually part of the entrepreneurship story. The breadth of this institution is mind-boggling. We have 17 schools and institutes. We represent every substantive field of intellectual endeavor, and no school, really, other than perhaps one or two in this universe, has the breadth and depth of Columbia University. And so that kind of leads me to a little audience response effort I'd like to undertake. So just answer with a one or two word answer when I ask the following questions. What's the financial capital of the United States? Right, that's good, good start. What's the arts center of the United States? Right, good. What's the media center of the United States? What's the fashion center of the United States? What's the public health and pharma center of the United States? What's the legal center of the United States? And what's the culinary center of the United States? And I've forgotten several. The point is that I'm trying to make is that the content for the majority of things that we care about as people, as a nation, as a society, are right here in the city of New York. This is now a one-syllable answer, or a one-word answer. What's the best university in the city of New York? I kind of fixed that one, but so our birthright is as the best, broadest, most comprehensive university, research university in the biggest, most important city for many of the things that we hold near and dear to us. It's our birthright to dominate the space and to be the entrepreneurship center of this great city and of this great country. We do it, just look around the room. There are students, alumni, faculty from every walk of life, from every field, from every school. But we haven't been doing it in an organized fashion. Today, we put our foot down and we say, this is Columbia entrepreneurship. We are colleagues, we are collaborators, we work together, because the sum of the parts creates a much greater whole, and that's what this today represents. This panel is near and dear to my heart, and I'm especially grateful to our panelists for coming here today. They are leaders in their field, and this is an extremely important part of what we mean when we talk about entrepreneurship. We don't just mean starting businesses, although it's very important. We mean solving problems that are extraordinarily important to our society and to our civilization. First, I'd like to introduce Vishaka Desai. Vishaka is my colleague as a special advisor to the president of Columbia, Lee Bollinger. Her focus is on global affairs. She's also a faculty member at the School of International and Public Affairs. Vishaka is the immediate past president of the Asia Society, which is an extraordinarily successful organization dedicated to creating and strengthening partnerships between the United States and that small region of the world called Asia. During her leadership, the Asia Society has grown substantially and is now considered one of the most prominent cultural and intellectual institutions in this city and around the world. To her right is my dear friend Jeff Canada. Jeff is the president and CEO of the Harlem Children's Zone, and I have the great honor and privilege of sitting on the board of the Harlem Children's Zone. I have firsthand knowledge as a result of how incredibly effective Jeff and the team there have been in confronting head-on issues of poverty and inequality of educational resources and opportunity in this city and in this country. Growing from an experiment in 1997, the Harlem Children's Zone covers 100 blocks in Harlem, serving over 10,000 children. The goal is to get each one of them through college, and almost to 100% degree of certainty, they would be the first in their family to go to college and get through college. The results have been extraordinary, and it's a very well-known fact that the Harlem Children's Zone, the model of the Harlem Children's Zone, is being emulated throughout the country through the President's Promise Neighborhood Program. And it is testament to Jeff's grit and determination that that model has been adopted nationally. The only other thing I would say is that one of the great, most inspiring documentaries I've ever seen is Waiting for Superman. It is the story of the Harlem Children's Zone and other institutions like it around the country. If you haven't seen it, do it tonight. It is one of the great, great stories of America. And then there's Claire, also my dear friend and colleague on the Board of Trustees, Claire Shipman. Claire has the distinction of being a graduate of two Columbia University institutions, the college and the School of International Public Affairs. She's one of the most prominent political journalists of our time, and has a noted career. You know, compliments are free. And is a noted interviewer of America's most important newsmakers, including Presidents Clinton, Bush, and Obama. And if you can get her on a quiet minute, she'll regale you with stories about either the fortune or the misfortune of sitting next to President Clinton on Air Force One for hours and hours and hours. Claire is also the author of the best-selling Womenomics and a second book which will come out momentarily called The Confidence Code. Claire will moderate this discussion, which we've entitled Driving Social Change Through Entrepreneurship, and I turn it over to them for what I'm sure will be a spectacular discussion. Thank you.
Us that I'm going to tweet out because I am becoming so modern and we want everybody to see the good times. It's like the Oscars, right? Awesome. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Richard. It's such an honor to be talking to the two of you and just to try to help all of us learn from what you've created. I wanted to start with just a very basic question because I think so many people are here to learn and try to get some things that they can use as well. So I guess, Vishaka, I'll start with you. What do you think are qualities that make a good social entrepreneur?
Well, I think first of all, let me just say, Richard, thank you very much for, in fact, inviting us to talk about social change. And to me, I think to be a social or cultural entrepreneur, first of all, you have to see what is a value proposition. What is it you want to do and why? And the second thing is the need. Why does it need to get done? And since you're talking about social change, it's not about the profit motive. So it really is about how and why do you need to do it. And then figure out how you're going to bring everybody along. And I think for me, since unlike my friend here, I have not started an organization. I've always been within an organization. So I call myself an inside subversive or an inside entrepreneur, which is say, how do I push the limit of an organization to change because what the world needs? So I think that's a really crucial point to me. And then see how do you bring everybody else along if you happen to be a leader.
And Jeff, what about you? Does the value and the need make sense? And any sort of personal attributes or a management style, something that would really distinguish, in your mind, a successful social entrepreneur?
I know an awful lot of people who wanted to solve a problem, but didn't take it seriously, right? They thought just because I care, right, and I'm passionate, I can go out. This is actually serious business, and it is, to me, one of the things that people don't really focus on is the intellectual capital that you need to accumulate to solve problems, the ability, I think Richard was talking about, working with. None of these problems can be solved by individuals. And one of the biggest challenges I think people face is you've got to be able to attract people who are smarter in many areas than you are and actually get them to work with you. And this idea of how is it you attract talent and you keep that talent focused on a set of really critical issues or things I think people don't really pay an awful lot of attention to. So it is more than just passion, although passion, I think it's very hard to do this kind of new, unique, I'm solving without passion. But it is simply not sufficient if you don't have a real set of skills. And in the end, you've got to have a set of business skills because many of the great efforts peter out because folks don't understand how to actually run the enterprise.
Well, that's something Richard was talking about earlier, too, the need to be able to cooperate with people because you've got to bring people together who know much more than you do in any manner of spheres. I wonder, just speaking of passion for a minute, do you find it a challenge? Because there are two different models we have here, as Vishaka pointed out. When you're starting something small and it's a dream and it's becoming credible, you are such a passionate character yourself. You attract people to you. How do you take something like that where you may be the central character and let it grow into something that might not always have you as a central character? Is that tricky for some of these propositions?
I think it's very tricky. I think that building an organization and actually sustaining that organization are often two different things. And there are people who are great builders. There's a person, I can't mention the name, there's a person who created a huge business with the people who made a lot of money from the business. And 10 or 12 years into the business that he was running, the same people decided to fire him. Now, he wasn't happy about that because he created, this was his business he created. And you know what? And then there was a lot of hurt feelings, but the business became even better. And at some point, that person realized that was the right thing to do. I think that mostly in our business, you don't have a board that's prepared to fire, right, the person for the sake of the business. And so these businesses sort of began to decline, and the charismatic leader has sort of lost his or her edge, and no one's prepared to say, hey, we need to really get some fresh thinking in this, a different perspective. So I think that these things happen in phases. In our business, the same way other business happens. The startup phase is not the same as sort of when you get this adolescent entity going, and then you end up with a pretty mature business that usually calls for a different set of skills to manage and run.
There you go. So one of the things you have to recognize is acknowledge your mistake. I didn't turn it on. So I think that therefore that idea that you are so synonymous with the institution because of the change agent that you've been or that you've formed something, you also begin to think that you're indispensable. And for me, for example, after being 22 years at the Asia Society, I knew it was time for me to leave. Partly because I wanted to do other things, but partly because institution needed a different direction.
But this
I think
is
it's very
interesting
important.
because you're right that in social entrepreneurship, there's a sense, I guess what you're both saying is you need to be every bit as hard-nosed and be careful that you're not just letting the passion for what you're doing cloud your judgment about growing it as a business.
Well, and I think that part of the challenge is that your judgment is clouded, right? I mean, that you start something, you kind of know it, right? You feel like you know it better than everybody else, so that's a great, you're going to bring your new mic up. I was pretending that it worked, even though I knew it did. I'm not sure that this one's working either. Thank you. All right, good. And so we are in a planned transition at the Harlem Children's Zone, which Richard knows. This was intentional. I thought one of the biggest challenges in not-for-profits is that the founder stays too long, The board loves them, right? My board, they love me. They don't want to tell me I'm not as good as I think I am anymore. And so the question is, can you get in front of this curve? Can you really say, when the organization is going up, I want to replace myself with someone who has, I think, an opportunity for folks to say, hey, that person's actually better than Jeff. Look at what happened to the end results. So the woman who's replacing me has been with us for 4 years. She's been prepared. She is terrific. I will guarantee you that she will do a job that people will say she actually is better. And I think if you love this enterprise you began, you have to realize where you're, I think, being a real asset and at what point you stop being an asset in the development of that entity.
To be a successful entrepreneur, we all know now you have to take risks and you have to fail. Where along the way, do you have any stories about things you tried and it was a dismal failure? Anything that's useful for all of us to learn from?
I never failed at it. No, I'm kidding. Well, no, because here's the challenge, I think, in the work we do, which is intentionally working in the deep end of the pool, meaning with the most troubled, the most distressed. Really, really smart people who are used to being successful find this a troubling place to work, because it proves to you you're not as good as you think you are on a regular basis. And I have found that because the data is so bad, a lot of folks just simply don't want to look at the data anymore. So part of my job is to discover where we're failing. And the reason I say we're a relatively large not-for-profit, a budget about $110 million, about 3,500 people work for us. And this is, maybe you found a difference in my business. If I ask my senior team, 20, 25 folk, how things are going, they tell me fine. I says, things fine. Yes, everything's good. How you doing? Y'all know it's good, Jeff, it's good. I've got 12,000 kids. It can't be good. If you've got 4 kids, it's not good.
That sort of reminds me of the healthcare, the sort of answers President Obama was likely getting on the healthcare rollout last fall.
Well,
Fine.
but that's exactly it, right? If you don't actually go looking for the problems, right, you can't solve them. And I found that no matter how many times I tell my team, my job is to help you solve problems, they all shake their head, and then they're like, nope, tell them I'm doing great, do not bring anything to them. So part of this is not just do you have the big failures. We started programs, we tripped and fell, we had schools that, I learned this really important lesson, anybody who's interested in education. We got our charter in May, and we were opening our school in September, so we started hiring teachers in June. Do you know which teachers are looking for jobs in June? Like the worst. And guess what happened? It was a disaster. And it was like, afterwards, I was like, well, I should have been able to figure that out, right? But some of these things, so part of the challenge is that you now have a set of failures that are demoralizing the people, right? And you really want to sort of get people refocused on the fact that, yes, we failed. You cannot... In my business, people say, no, it really wasn't failure. No, don't think of it as failure. No, it was really a failure and it was bad. Now, how can we get better? And if you can't produce success, you will demoralize people and they will turn away. So you have to be able to confront what's not working, but you also have to be able to tell your team that we're making progress, and they have to see progress so they don't fear failure, and to a point of saying, if I show this, right, then it's going to be all negative. Part of, I think, in these learning opportunities that almost everybody in the deep end of the pool is learning the business, right, is that you've got to have failure allow you to become better at what it is that you're doing if you're going to be, I think, competitive.
It's, and just listening to Richard talk about your goals, that it seems to me that it's very important, especially in social entrepreneurship, to have very clear goals that can be, to some extent, measured. It's not always easy, because I can see that, yes, okay, getting kids to college, I mean, that's a great benchmark, and then you can work from that. But it's harder, right, Vishaka, with something like the programs you were trying to do. How exactly do you measure
it's
success?
very interesting, actually, right now in the cultural sector, for example. this is a big issue because every funder wants assessment. Every funder wants impact assessment. But often it's all about quantitative analysis. So the truth of the matter is, if I tell you how many people came to something, especially in the business we're in, because we're not in the deep end of retail business. You know, we're trying to affect opinions and things like that. So it's even harder. And especially in the art world, it's even harder. Because if two kids from Queens or the Bronx came to the Asia Society and they got completely enamored of the part of the world that they had never experienced before, and they become interested, well, I'm not going to know that until another 15 years. But the problem is that that doesn't mean you don't create some benchmarks. So one of the things that we talk about a lot is what often people have talked about is logic model, which is to say, at least establish your goals clearly. If you want to do this, let's say you've done an art exhibition, and it's the most innovative new thing you think it is. But if nobody else says that at the end of it, guess what? You have to assess it and say, you know, people didn't get it. So what's the problem? So you have to set the goal to say, what is it you're trying to do? And then create measurements around it. So that if the measurement is only about, well, you know, I sold out, well, that's not good enough. Not in my business. And that, I think, is key.
And I just want to say that I'm sort of on the board of an arts organization, and there are a lot of folk who really don't want to fund what I consider to be the things that make us human, right? The things that are really, that they want to fund. Especially now. And it's just become, and here's one of the challenges in this business. You have to raise money. I mean, I hate to tell you, I know some, you have to raise money, and it is not easy because it is a very competitive.
You have to love it, right?
And I think everybody thinks that you're going to hire somebody really terrific, and they're going to know you're going to have to raise the money. They may send you out to places to raise the money, but you're going to be basically begging. I hate to tell you, but that's essentially what it is. And where the field is now, they want hard data. Right? They want to be able to say, for my X, I got Y, and I can count it, and I can measure it, I can feel good about it. The problem in the business is that a lot of folk have tried to talk about their business in terms that satisfies the funders, but clouds the mission, and you end up being neither fish nor fowl. Right? You're not a great arts organization, but neither are you driving academic outcomes. And I think that is one of the most difficult parts of this business is raising money, but being true to your core values of what your business is. Absolutely. Because the marketplace for financing will push you to change and adjust in ways that seem to be small compromises, but over time actually can undermine the business.
So what's the solution to that? Is it getting the right funders who are like-minded? Is it good communication with the funders? How do you handle that? Just you know, smart presentations about really what your goal is and what to expect?
I mean, one of the things that at least I found is that often to really develop a sense of funders as your partners so that it, in fact, is something they're invested in. Now, you can't do that with everybody. But you really have to have a core group of people or foundations or corporations that say, okay, we are all in it together. So that this Young Leaders Program that I talked about with an amazing, major funder from a corporate sponsor, and part of it was to really give them the idea of why this is important. And then say, if we want to measure it, let's together figure out what you feel good about and what success would look like. And if it doesn't happen, then let's tweak it to see how we can make it happen. But I think it does not obviate the need, I would say to my colleagues in my business, it doesn't obviate the need for some measurement. Because it's business that, oh, I can't measure it, it's so all experiential. I'm sorry, not good enough. But you also have to think about, stay true to your mission, make sure that you measure, and be hard-nosed about it. And recognize when you didn't meet expectations.
There's one area of, I think, the social entrepreneurship that people don't pay a lot of attention to. and that is how you put together a board. Your board could be your biggest ally, and you know, we have to raise a lot of money at the Harlem Children's Zone, and I found out this funny thing. To raise a lot of money, you actually have to know people who have money. And if you don't, which I didn't, right?
Everybody got that, right?
Just it's a funny thing.
Fundamental.
But what if you don't know and you can't everybody wants to form relationships, but how is it that you actually get into that arena, right? Because it's not just having a good idea, you have to actually have a chance to present them. And so this idea of how do you expand your network and allow, I think, an opportunity for good ideas to get in front of the right people. I think the boards are absolutely critical, and I think that lots of folks spend a lot of time on the business aspects, but not a lot of time on thinking how do you build a powerful board that can get you in front of, right, the folks that you can then sort of try to make your presentation and have them support.
And do you think when thinking about the board, because this is, I mean, now we're really into the nitty gritty, I think, for people, is it, you know, do you have advice on thinking outside of the box about who might be good on a board, or people, you know, younger people on a board? Obviously, we read about women on boards, but I mean, thinking about different kinds of experience these days than we might have thought of 10 years ago.
I think actually there are two sides to that coin. To me, at least my observation is that there is a certain amount of corporatization of boards of many not-for-profit institutions. And what I mean by that is that money becomes the predominant question. Who can give, who can get you, very important, absolutely important. But sometimes you sacrifice diversity of voices. And I don't mean ethnic alone, but I mean age, I mean connections of different sort, intellectual connections, because you need that too. And I think that you have to make sure that you create that balance. Now, in an existing organization, like where I came in, there are also certain protocols and things that you actually have to work within. So there are some constraints. But how do you change that? So for example, when I took over, and even when I came to the Age Society first, there were very few Asian Americans on the board. And I said, we think this is important, well, we gotta change this. So you have to begin to think, at the same time, money is an issue. So you say, okay, how do I balance both of those? It's not that they're not rich Asian Americans, there are plenty of them, but they're not always feeling comfortable because there was no history of it. So what else do you need to do? And so building a board, creating steps by the time you get there, and involvement is, I think, another very big question and an important element.
You know, and this is something else Richard and I were talking about, which is it has to be critical. I mean, you've both talked about this sort of being defined, hard-nosed, clear in your goals. But when you're doing things like you've done and creating what you've created, you have to be able to call audibles all the time. So you've got to, you know, how do you balance that, you know, sticking to the long-term vision and not knowing you're going to get there, but at the same time recognizing when things aren't going to go your way, needing to pivot, shift, take advantage of new opportunities?
Well, I think you've really raised one of the real challenges. The world changes. In the 80s, we had a crack cocaine epidemic that caught all of us totally unaware. We seen, in my whole entire history of working, I had never seen anything sweep through a community the way this did. It undermined families. It particularly was hard hit on women who sort of, because they were raising children, we had this huge influx into foster care. And I found that by the time the trend was changing, most of the folks in the business area just started becoming aware of it. But already it was trending down. So this idea of can you stay sort of in front of the challenges you're facing, we have this real push to get kids into college, right at the same time that the bottom was falling out of, right, the employment market in the country. So then the question becomes now, what do you do? This idea of being flexible and having a certain amount of resources reserved to be able to handle, right, things you hadn't thought about is absolutely critical in this business. People don't ever think about it. I mean, you have a budget, every dollar is allocated, and it leaves you totally unprepared for when stuff happens and you need to respond. And I will tell you this, the ability to respond in that moment often separates organizations that seem to be cutting edge from those who seem to be like those, oh, they seem to be really slow, not able to adjust. So I think planning on that when you're thinking about how you're designing budgets and other things is really important.
I think part of it is also pacing. That sometimes you find something, it happened to us when we were starting this globalized public education program in public schools and taking over some schools. And then we realized in Lower East Side, as well as in fact in one of the poor districts in Queens, that we were finding that kids were coming, but there was something about the parents that we hadn't quite gotten right. And we were so focused on starting the school and getting the teachers and getting the principal that we had not paid attention to the parents. What that meant is that things slowed down. But you have to allow for that. Because if you don't, then you're going to fail anyhow. The second piece is also opportunities come your way. But how not to take and jump on every opportunity just because the money is there, because it might get you deviated from where you need to be, is the other set of questions.
And I want to open it up for questions, but I have one more that interests me personally, coming from Washington in a place where there's just the sort of the opposite of entrepreneurial spirit. It's just, you know, mired in political gridlock. And I've been talking to a lot of people lately, experts, about just how can we make our government have a more entrepreneurial spirit? And so I guess I wonder from two different perspectives here, it being in a big organization or a more corporate culture and creating an entrepreneurial zone, what are the challenges or things to think about? And then trying to work with larger organizations that are bureaucratic and you're trying to inspire them and shake them loose a little bit. Any tips on those things?
So let me just say this idea of working in government, which we really skirted around the government in the creation phase of our work. So we had government contracts for child welfare or early childhood, but the creation of the glue for the zone was all done with private dollars because we would still be trying to get the laws changed to do the stuff, right? It just takes too long. But when President Obama's team decided they were going to replicate our work, one of the things, right after the election, myself and Angela Blackwell, who was sort of my partner in working with the feds on this from PolicyLink, we went into talk to the team and we insisted that 50% of the money be private, that it was not going to be 100%, because we knew if this thing was 100% federally funded, there would be no pressure, right, to really produce results, right? That it would become simply a political football. I know, I just found it out, but this is reality. Right. People have to run for office, right. And when they run for office, everything works. And they will not deal with the fact that something is not working. And this work, it calls on you to constantly confront your failures and try to fix them versus sort of papering them over with a political sort of talk. And so some folks thought it was too much to do 50%, but we really insisted because people who put their private money in something, they actually want to see results. And they don't care what the election cycle is. They want to hold people accountable. So I think I am a big fan of public-private partnerships when the private side holds the government side feet to the fire, right? They just won't accept sort of, this thing is really working and we can just keep funding it. So, and I found that to be the same on both sides of the aisle, that these funding of programs that simply don't work happens for lots of reasons which for us seem to be crazy, but inside Washington, they have very strong reasons to continue funding things that don't work, and I think that's a real problem.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think the other piece, at least in my experience with working with the government, is to find some champions. So that, for example, because at the Age Society, we were in the business of also trying to get some stuff in the policy, and making sure that that happens. So that, for example, with Arne Duncan, the education secretary, we had a big discussion with him and a couple of his people about global education, learning about the world, and why that's important, because everybody was focused on STEM, you know, it's math and science and now STEAM, even the arts, but we were not really talking about how are we going to be globally competitive, which is something that obviously we talk about at Columbia as well. And we found that, again, it was public-private partnership. We came with a certain amount of money, but we wanted to get injected into certain federal policy that this was important. And the only way we could do it was to find one or two champions, get them involved in other discussions we were doing, see the results, and then get them to be champions. And without those individuals, I mean, I just think that we think of government as this behemoth and a big bureaucracy, but there are people, and people who can actually make something happen. Yeah.
Can I just say one thing that I really wanted to say something about, which has to do with the successfully navigating these waters. And I think it's really important in thinking about your board that you really think about diversity in the way that it was mentioned, but also politically.
Right.
We have both Republicans and Democrats on our board, and you never know when you'll need which side of the aisle. And it's a funny thing. My board chair, the guy, Stan Druckenmiller, worked for George Soros. George is as left as you can go. Stan, when I met him, was a Republican. And I asked him, how does that work? And he says, we're not in it for politics, we're in it to make money. And I thought, you know what? We're in it to save kids, right? We're not in it because we want this side to be right or that side to be right. We want to save kids. And so I think this idea that you can get allies who can help you with your mission as long as you don't get caught up. And I find a lot of folks in my space are very leery, right, of dealing with folks from one side of the aisle or the other. They just think, no, that's going to somehow, impugn my, dignity or my ethics and stuff. And I have found that to be totally, totally irrelevant. When you've got a Republican governor, you better have a couple of Republicans who can help you. You've got a Republican mayor, you've got a Democrat. You just need folks to help you do your job, do your business. And I think politics, fortunately or unfortunately, is part of this. And the question is, are you able to bring folk together around a mission, right, where politics is not going to interfere with people coming together?
Well, and they're there. I mean, I was just struck by just yesterday, George W. Bush talking again about No Child Left Behind. And so people just, you cannot put people in boxes. But all right, I'm sure you all have specific questions. So Emily, I think we have microphones circling, so don't be shy.
We have time for a few questions.
I'm a student at Williams, and I was wondering what you think about for-profit social entrepreneurship efforts. I know that in India, there was a recent IPO in 2010 of SKS, a microfinance organization. There was a lot of controversy surrounding that, and I was wondering what you think about the future of social entrepreneurship in America, and whether it's for-profit social entrepreneurship, and whether it can be predatory or positive.
That's a great question.
Wow. First of all, I mean, it is interesting about SKS, and that's something I know a little bit about, only because at the age study we invested in SKS because of its value proposition. And then we were all very concerned as to how it blew up, in terms of microfinance. But I do think that that doesn't mean that you throw the baby out with the bathwater. Because I think that as we go into the 21st century, we really, really have to think about new, innovative ways of combining the value proposition with financial possibility. Because the idea that everything is going to be all supported by contribution dollars, I just don't think it's going to work for the next 50 years. So we have to come up with new solutions, and there are people who are doing it. I mean, there are a number of companies that are now investing in, especially in South Asia, where it is both about investment, it's about good value, good proposition, and making sure that you are not compromising entirely for money. So the profit motive is there, but it's not sole motive.
When you see this too.
That's a big important thing, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question, And it just reminds me that one of the things that I think social entrepreneurs don't pay enough attention to is the issue around ethics, around real values. Anyone can be corrupted by any number of things, and a lot of folk get in this space and don't really recognize how vulnerable they are to temptations. And they're all out there, and I've just seen lots of things. And you know what's so sad about it is when this happens, it seems to be larger than it is. Something that became big suddenly became corrupt, and people say, there goes the end of that. That was a bad idea. Well, you know what? It's no different than anything else that fails because of corruption, and you find it in, just open the paper today. You'll see all kinds of stuff in finance and other places where people acted poorly, but we don't think, let's do away with the banks, right? Sometimes, but in our space, because it is so rare to be branded, if you get there and then you are corrupt, you are incompetent, that you do something that catches the press's attention, you're liable to really hurt the field. And people are liable to say that actually it was a bad idea. This was not a bad idea. So I think, and just on the issue of whether it's for-profit or not-for-profit, I think that these two arenas are going to have a lot of cross-cutting interaction. I think people are going to float between the two and are going to get a set of skills that are going to be valuable on both sides. And I would think that it's an artificial division between whether or not it's for-profit or not-for-profit in terms of social entrepreneurship. And I think you're going to find that people need a lot of the same skills.
I think right up in the front row. Ladies.
Hi. My name is Prashil Govind, and I'm a pediatrician. And one of the questions I have is going back to what you talked about when it comes to social entrepreneurship. You said it's also important to have accountability. And the question is, early on, when you're proposing big changes where supporting and nurturing young children, and the outcomes are way down the road, how do you keep people coming along and maintaining support for what you're doing when you may not have those metrics up front? And that continues to be a question that's, outside from just having your sheer personality to drive it, how do you maintain that support?
That is not an easy question to answer because there has been so many efforts that have not produced any outcomes after people made huge investments that I think people are rightfully suspicious, right? One of the things I've tried to be is just honest. I don't in our business, the part of the business theory was you overpromise, right, to get the grant, and then you're going to underdeliver, but that's tough. You already got the money, right? And it was like a bidding war down, right? I can save 1,000 kids for 200,000. I can do it for 150. But it had nothing to do with reality, right? And funders supported the low bid, and then they got what they paid for, right? Because it ended up not working, but it got all of us involved in this bad behavior. If I say what it really costs, I'm probably not going to be able to convince the foundation to do it, so I'm going to sort of make up a number and hope it all works out in the end. I've decided we've got to be much more transparent. It's going to take me 3 years to produce this, but this is what you're going to see in year 1, year 2. You're going to see some indications that we're heading in the right direction, but no, I cannot solve this, right, in the 18 months of your grant, right, which is what people want to hear. And I think that obviously a lot of our behavior is shaped by success, right? And if people keep forcing you to sort of overpromise, then folks in the business do. And I think it's up to a lot of us in the field to be having conversations, right, about time and the deliverables with the foundation and the other funding communities that stops them sort of forcing folk to say things that aren't actually possible to do, that I'm going to solve this problem in this short period of time. The idea that some problems take 6, 7, 8, 9 years, really before you get the outcomes, is something that I think is problematic. We were just going through our charter school review, and the folks looked at our college rates and college retention, which puts us in the top 1% of all high schools in New York. And they looked at the early stuff and they said, well, how come your early stuff is so lousy, but your end stuff is so, I say, because I can't do it in 5 years. I thought I could, I can't. Other people can do it, I can't. I need 9 years. If you give me 9 years, I can solve this. Being able to get evidence, to have that conversation, I think with folk allows people to feel a little bit more comfortable that they're just not wasting money and you're just not sort of ignoring the fact that you don't have data to support what it is you're doing.
And in this time, 9 years, I mean, in our short attention span society, it's, but you might as well be honest. All right, I know there are some women out there with questions. Yes.
Hello, my name's Rena Stein, and I founded a nonprofit called Goodie Bags, and we provide backpacks of items to kids in unstable living conditions, and it's a pay-it-forward model, so all recipients then have to give back to somebody else. So I understand intellectually, you know, everything you're saying about it's a business, but my social worker, bleeding heart self can't seem to make the jump to, you know, taking part of grants and taking part of funding for myself, because I just look at these kids and I think, you know, they need this more than me, but clearly that's not sustainable. I mean, I wear this outfit every day, so I can't afford new clothes. So, I mean, how do you know when it's okay to kind of convert to that business model and be realistic for yourself and, you know, what you're trying to do, and not, you know, be unethical with your funders about where the money's going? Just
That's a great question.
Startup. I mean, it's much more for Jeffrey than for me in a way, because it's a particular question of startups, you know, when you are the founder and you really are driven by the mission. In my experience, again, having been on several boards, but also having talked to other colleagues, is that I think at some point you do have to be hard-nosed about combining your value and your mission with the operation and success of your institution that you're trying to find. And if those two don't come together, at some point, either you'll burn out or the organization will go. So you have to figure out, now, does that mean that you're gonna take too much? I mean, I can tell you, a very former friend of mine, I will say, who wanted to start an organization. The idea was brilliant. And so my husband and I said, okay, this is great, let's really help you. And it turns out that we helped him raise the money, and the first things he did was to buy stuff for himself. We were so upset that we said, that's it. He's no longer a friend, and we're not going to help. Now, that obviously is not acceptable. And he said, but I need to look good. I need to be in this position. And the work he was doing was for making Buddhism more acceptable to everybody else, and, you know, education, et cetera. It's like, what? This doesn't fit. So the point is that you do need to be professional, but you have to know what is right and when, and be hard-nosed about it.
we should talk, because if you give me money, I won't give them.
I was like, oh, you've got skills. I like that.
Not bad.
Let me say something, because I was faced with this, and I'll tell you, you're going to run up against this in a couple of places. One is you cannot scale altruism.
Right.
You can be altruistic and have a little tiny business and run it off volunteer. But if you're really trying to get to a big issue, at some point you're going to have to bring on professionals, and they cost money. You get what you pay for in this business. And I was limited because I was, every dollar I saw going into books and supplies and my young people, and somebody, that was like an outrageous amount of money, right? So I kept thinking I could hire folks who wouldn't charge me an outrageous amount of money, and guess what? They were not very good. In the end, we could not scale, we could not get bigger. When you start looking at the areas that you really have to pay for talent, development, folks are expensive. And if you're not prepared to pay those salaries, you're going to maintain a tiny enterprise that's not going to be able to scale. Now, for some folks, that's fine, because they don't have a larger vision of what it is they want to do. But I am telling you that this idea of paying competitive salaries is something that lots of social entrepreneurs, you know, at the beginning of organizations, it's fine. You get your friends, everybody, but you are not going to be able to run that business 5, 6, 7 years down the road if you don't begin to really deal with the fact that we're all competing for talent. Everybody is.
And don't you, I just would think is the impression you create in trying to raise money. I mean, the people from whom you're trying to get money, they don't want to see somebody who's not ever buying new clothes and is a bleeding heart. I mean, they want to see somebody who looks savvy about a business.
Well, yeah, and I think people, this is an unfair characterization. People consider those do-gooders to have limited, right, skills of running a business. And so they're not thinking of giving those folks any real money, right? Because they're just like, well, it's great, but you're not really taking a salary, so you obviously don't have the sort of budgeting that allows you. So I just think you're working against all of that, which is not to do the opposite, right? Which is to go take the money and buy new cars and other stuff, because plenty of people do that. But I think there is at the beginning of an organization, you have to start thinking about this, I think, at a beginning level. But 2, 3, 4 years from now, you're going to have to think about this totally different in terms of, I think, what that infrastructure looks like and what it actually costs to run a decent not-for-profit.
I think we have time for one last burning question. Anyone? Yeah.
You're both extraordinarily talented people. There's a societal expectation that because you're doing good, because you're helping kids, you should be making a lot less money than if you had gone into the private sector. And is that something that you think is keeping other people from following in your footsteps, that they're expected to live a pauper's life? And have you gone through that thought process of, why should I have to make so much less money because I'm running a very successful enterprise, but that it's not a bank or something that's aimed at being hugely profitable?
Wow. That is like a big question for our society. Why is it that certain people make less money than other people, right? I will say this, that actually not-for-profit salaries in terms of top institutional positions now are not so bad. Are actually
But they get criticized.
And they're being criticized. That's the problem. They're being criticized because there is this notion that they shouldn't. But on the other hand, if you're going to be competitive to get the best talent, it isn't going to work anymore. It just isn't going to work anymore. But, I mean, I do think that, why is it that bankers make gazillion amount of money compared to professors? On the other hand, if any one of us thought that we were going to do this because we're going to be rich, we wouldn't be in this business. So to some extent, there is something about the passion, the mission, the value that you want to make a difference in the world, and therefore, yes, you want to have enough money. But do you need so much money that you have a yacht somewhere? Maybe not. So I think there is, and at the same time, am I really happy with the choices I made? Absolutely. Feel grateful for that. Yeah.
And I really couldn't agree more. When I began in the field, it really was taking a vow of poverty, right? You just knew you weren't going to really make enough to live on if you wanted to go into the field. That has changed dramatically. I mean, when early in my career, we knew no one who was making $100,000. It was just unheard of. Right now, you have folks make $1 million. Right? You look in foundations, museums, colleges, universities, sports, right? These are all not-for-profits. So the ceiling has raised, and it means everything underneath it now has a lot more, I think, flexibility when people really assumed if you were in this business, it was almost unethical to pay you a living wage. I think we're going to, when I say, I think this is a permeable membrane, and we're going to see people crossing. I will tell you, the other side of that, though, is all about outcomes. And when people act badly in this business, there's stuff going on right now about not-for-profit, lots of money, folks doing it all. It really, I think, tends to make folks think about this part of the business differently than when people act badly in the for-profit. right? It's almost like, well, we expect people to act badly there, right? But not over here, right? You guys are supposed to be like the saints.
So the exception becomes the rule, as if,
it
you
is.
know? Yeah.
But I think what you're going to find is for high-performing organizations, the salaries are going to be competitive enough to be very attractive to folk who don't want to take a vow of poverty.
I'm just going to thank you both, and I'm literally trying to write down bullet points of everything I've learned, and I have too many, but just some things to take away when you talked about obviously needing passion. I loved fire yourself, which I think is something you should all get ready to contemplate, but the usefulness of boards and thinking about that and thinking about diversity on boards in different ways, thinking about the sort of idea of a rainy day flexible fund for all of the things that you don't know are going to happen, but will happen. Clearly defined mission that you try to keep your funders from clouding for you, and talking to your team and yourself a lot about embracing failure and honesty with investors and your team. So much more, but I think we've just had an incredible session. Thank you both. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Shaka.
Thank you.
Really.
Thank you.